It all started with an awkward silence by the coffee machine. Anna, the new analyst in the marketing department, was the embodiment of order. She was quiet, erudite, and had a love for perfectly structured reports. Mark, the head of development, was her complete opposite, an energetic, slightly chaotic genius whose bursts of inspiration regularly disrupted the well-established workflows. Their worlds collided at the very first planning meeting. Mark was enthusiastically presenting a new feature for the app. Anna, raising her hand, calmly remarked, "That's interesting, but without a preliminary market analysis, we can't assess its potential. I have the data." Mark smiled, but a flicker of impatience shone in his eyes. "Data is great, Anna, but sometimes you just need to act and not overanalyze." And so began their rhythmic battle. He was the wind of change, she was the anchor of reason. They communicated only through formal emails, copies of which were immediately sent to management. Anna thought he was a selfish egotist. Mark saw her as an arrogant coward. Everything changed when the CEO announced the start of Project Phoenix, the creation of a revolutionary new product. Mark was appointed the lead, but on one condition: every step he took had to be backed by analytical data from Anna. They were trapped, forced to work together for hours in a closed office. The air in the room grew thick with unspoken words. They exchanged only dry, businesslike phrases. The turning point came late one evening when the office was empty. Anna, finishing up a report, noticed the light was still on in Mark's office. She peeked inside. He was sitting, hunched over his desk, staring blankly at the screen. On the wall hung the project plan, covered in red question marks. "Is something wrong?" she asked cautiously. He looked up at her with a tired expression. "Everything is wrong. My idea will fail. You were right. I don't have the data." Anna didn't say "I told you so." Instead, she sat down next to him and opened her laptop. "Show me where you started." They worked together that night. She showed him graphs and trends. He told her about technical possibilities and hidden risks she hadn't even considered. They argued, but it was no longer a conflict, it was a search for the truth. He brought her coffee, she shared her chocolate with him. She laughed when he told a funny story about his first failed project, and he was surprised to see how her smile made her face incredibly beautiful. The Phoenix began to take shape. Their collaboration became the stuff of office legend. Mark's energy was now channeled in the right direction, and Anna's reports came alive with his vision. But soon, a new threat emerged. A competitor, having learned about the Phoenix, was preparing a similar product. Panic gripped the team. It was then that Anna and Mark held a secret meeting. Working through the entire weekend, they came up with a brilliant idea, not to release a finished product, but to launch a live beta test, inviting customers to co-create it with them. It was a gamble, but one supported by Anna's impeccable data. At the presentation for the board of directors, Mark spoke with passion, painting a picture of the future, while Anna backed his every word with steel-clad arguments. They complemented each other like two halves of a single whole. The approval was granted. The launch of the Phoenix was a sensation. The Create With Us approach struck right at the heart of the market. A few weeks after the success, the office was quiet again. Anna was sitting at her desk, finishing her final notes. Mark approached her. You haven't left yet. I was about to. And you. I wanted to propose something. To celebrate our success. No charts or reports. He held out his hand. In his palm were 2 tickets for an evening flight to Venice. This is unexpected, Anna whispered, looking from the tickets to his eyes. In his gaze, she saw not only his former confidence, but also anxiety, hope, and sincere tenderness. I know, but the best decisions, he smiled, recalling her own words, sometimes require a little analysis. And I've analyzed that without you, my ideas are just chaos. And your data without my energy is just numbers. Together, we. She didn't let him finish. She took 1 ticket, her fingers gently brushing against his palm. Together we are a team, she said, and this time her smile was bright and happy. And I always trust the data. And the data says this is the most rational and the best idea you have ever had. They left the office together, hand in hand, forgetting the arguments of the past and embarking on the newest, most interesting journey of their lives. Subscribe to the channel to receive fresh stories and not miss them. Venice met them with warm evening air, saturated with the scent of the sea and coffee. The first few hours felt like a dream. They wandered through narrow streets branching off from the canals, losing all sense of time and space. Their conversations were no longer about work. He told her about his childhood by the sea. She spoke of her grandmother's orchard that smelled of apples. They laughed, and their laughter was light and natural, as if they had been doing it all their lives. When it grew completely dark, they found a small restaurant tucked away in a quiet quarter. Seated at a table on the cobblestones under an old-fashioned lantern, they were served pasta with seafood and chilled white wine. The candlelight reflected in their eyes. You know, I never thought data analysis could be so exciting, Mark said softly, twisting the stem of his glass. His gaze was fixed on her, intense and warm. And I never thought impulsiveness could be so well-founded, Anna replied, feeling a light blush color her cheeks. Their legs accidentally touched under the table, and neither of them pulled away. They walked back to the hotel along a dark canal, where the only witnesses were the reflections of the moon on the water. Their shoulders touched, and then his fingers found hers, intertwining tightly as if they never intended to let go. The hotel room was small, with high ceilings and a window overlooking the starry sky. The door closed with a quiet click, and suddenly the air grew thick with anticipation. The lighting was soft. Mark gently guided Anna away from the door and pressed her back against the wall, without letting go of her hands. He didn't kiss her right away. Instead, he leaned his forehead against hers, his breath warm on her lips. I've been waiting for this since that evening you laughed at my story about the failed project, he whispered. That's when I realized I wanted to hear that laugh always. You should have told me then, she answered, her hand tracing the line of his jaw. We would have saved so much time. He finally kissed her. It wasn't a hasty, greedy kiss. It was slow, exploratory, as if he wanted to memorize the shape of her lips and she the taste of his. It was a discovery they had postponed through months of tense work. Subscribe to the channel to receive more interesting stories. When they pulled apart, his gaze never left hers as he led her to the bed. Every touch was deliberate, every unfastened button a promise. The clothes that had once separated them now lay forgotten on the floor. Now it was just Anna and Mark, without titles or reports. His fingers traced her skin as if studying a fascinating new theory. Her hands explored the muscles of his back, feeling the strength she had so often seen tense during work, but now that strength was yielding to her. Their breaths grew shallow, whispers of names replacing words. The light from the street painted silvery, dancing stripes on the ceiling, moving in rhythm with them. This wasn't frenzy. It was a slow, deep dance where every movement was a continuation of the dialogue they had started back in the office. He whispered words of approval to her, the same ones he used in presentations, but now they sounded like the most tender secrets. She answered him with the same determined gaze she used during analysis, but now it held complete surrender. Later, when the night began to fade into dawn, they lay tangled together, watching the stars outside the window grow pale. Anna's body was pressed against his back, her hand resting on his chest, feeling the calm, steady beat of his heart. "You know what this means on Monday," he whispered mischievously into the darkness, turning to face her. "What?" She sighed, closing her eyes. "Our arguments by the coffee machine are going to be much more interesting now." She laughed, and the sound was one of pure happiness. "That's the only thing I can predict with 100% certainty." The office romance that began with clashes and intrigue found its perfect ending not in the triumphant success of the Phoenix, but in a quiet morning hour in Venice. They woke to the sunlight flooding the room and understood they had found something far more valuable than a career victory. They had found each other. Subscribe to the channel to receive more interesting stories. Back in the office, they didn't flaunt anything. But now, when their eyes met during meetings, they shared a secret. Their touches, when handing over coffee, lingered. Their disagreements now ended with quiet laughter and a quick kiss in an empty conference room. They worked long and happily and lived. And the best ending to their story wasn't another project, but the 2 golden rings that appeared on their fingers a year later, and the shared office where analysis and creativity had finally become one.